Log stardate December 4th, 2023. Coming to you live from a boat with Carolyn Robistow. We're talking about gray area drinking and using Brainspotting to reduce drinking and during life coaching.
I am on a boat. I'm wearing my I'm on a boat shirt like I told you I would.
And the for audio listeners, I'm actually not kidding about what's going on in the video this time. Carolyn is on a boat.
I am on a boat. It is not the stardate. It's a water boat, not a space
Do you
boat.
keep a captain's log? Like, do you have to, or does the electronics do that for you now? Is there a black box on boats? How does this work?
Yes and yes. So you don't have to unless you're and speaking of I'm on a boat now, like the noisiest things are going to be around me and trying to maintain minimal
Authentic
noises.
boat noises.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's a podcast of verite.
Yeah.
Is what we strive for. You know,
if anything is so loud it's problematic, just let me know and I'll see if I can do something about it. But so if you're a licensed captain, you have to keep a captain's log. Neither of us are licensed captains yet.
Do you have a quill?
Log. Do I have a quill?
Yeah.
I have a pointer. I have a Brainspotting pointer always nearby. Does that count? Maybe I should put a feather on it.
Like when is it a digital type thing of where you dock and whatever, just in case the boat is found adrift?
I do. I keep it on my iPad just because that's where I take all of my notes for all of the things. But I did get my husband like a nice branded bound captain's log that has like the boat name kind of embossed on it. It's really fancy.
Is it like driving a CDL like truck? Like, do they audit your log, or you're just supposed to have it if
you're I don't know, because we haven't done that in the captain's license training. I'm sure when you get your captain's license they'll tell you what you have to have it for, but really for us it's more just because we want to be able to remember. And even then we talked about how we have been on the boat for close to 3 months now, and already I'm like, where were we when that happened? What was going on? Wasn't that this person? And it is all already running together. So
makes sense that you would. Yeah. And pirates, is that a thing? Like any like boat related? It is.
Yeah,
So
pirates are a thing. We've not been in waters where pirates are. We've done all of our traveling so far in the Atlantic intracoastal waterway. So we've been kind of, if you imagine like a boat freeway that actually cuts through land that people really only are aware of if they live in the area. So there's always been like a slice of land and then the ocean. We've not gone. People kind of talk about it like, are you on the outside or the inside when you're traveling? And we have only thus far traveled on the inside.
What's it called when you go like all the way up the coast and then down the Mississippi River and make like a loop around half the country? There's like some like club of people that do the loop.
Oh yeah, we're in that club. We're starting it in the spring. We're in.
But you get stuck certain places where there's like not gas and provisions, like you have to prepare. That's wild.
Yeah, it's called the Great Loop. The club is America's Great Loop Cruisers Association, AGLC, I don't know, something like that. But we are in it. But yeah, it's a great group.
I think that we have like exhausted as much as I know boats right now, but that is fascinating.
Too.
Yeah, so Carolyn life coaches and brain spots and does a lot of cool work from a boat, which means that she can see you internationally or outside of Alabama, unlike me. So I wanted to, not only because I like her podcast and I like some of the stuff that she's put out there, but also make it available to people who email me outside of the state of Alabama and ask me to see them for brain spotting. Because if you're in Alabama, there's a little bit of a wait list for Taproot. And if you're outside of Alabama, I'm sorry, but we're not able to see you at all ever. But Carolyn can, and she does, a lot of the same stuff, but more specific stuff than we do. So that's exciting. But so like, can you go through a little bit of like your approach and the services you offer and how all that stuff works?
Absolutely. My approach. Well, let me back it up.
We always joke that there's like 2 therapy profiles that you can write. And one of them is like specializing in complex trauma for dissociative, trained in the CBT for the focus of the doctor, whatever. And then the other one is like, sometimes life is an ocean that becomes a beach, but when it is a mountain, the streams of our thoughts don't meet the iceberg of our heart in the same way. And those are like the 2.
They are. I'll tell you now that, okay, here's mentally, I'm going to compose my Psychology Today profile because I don't have one anymore. I took it down when I stopped seeing therapy clients and moved just to coaching.
Psychology Today tries to help you out because instead of just being like, write about what you do, which they know the therapists will mess up, they're like, describe your ideal client, and then it'll tell you how they're going to format it. So when it smushes it together in a paragraph, it kind of has the flow of good copy editing. But describe your ideal client just is such a funny phrase to me, like long
we're a
walks
dating
on
site.
beaches, yeah, like blonde hair, teeth,
Yeah, yeah,
like, what?
Yeah,
I like all my clients. Yeah,
I'll tell you, if I had a profile today, it would start with, in the immortal words of Elle Woods, after getting into Harvard Law, what? Like it's hard? Except we'd be saying it about changing habits and our relationship with alcohol and perfectionism. I think those are kind of my main things. But what I love specifically about how I've woven in Brainspotting with this, kind of traditional coaching work is that it does make it where people are like, oh God, that was so much easier than I expected. Not that it makes it easy per se, but it just, and this is so funny to use this phrase because it is so often associated with drinking, but I feel like Brainspotting takes the edge off of this work.
Oh yeah.
It just takes the edge off. So it's not quite as intense or hard for people to make the changes that they want to come and make, or any type of subcortical. I say Brainspotting because it's the one that I use the most, but what I mean is any type of brain body based subcortical focused process.
That I think that's my favorite line from Breaking Bad, is where like all the guys are sitting around in the basement. They're like, "Does anyone have any meth?" And everyone looks at him, and he's like, "Just enough to take the edge off."
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Brainspotting meth, just enough to take the edge off. But yeah, so that's how I would start my Psychology Today profile, I think.
Well, yeah, and I think that's it. Is that there's so many people assume that it's about like intellect or knowing something or having information or being told what to do or a list of steps.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, maybe in 1955, but at this point, like we've all seen The Sopranos. We sort of have intuited the CBT. We sort of have intuited the stereotype of psychoanalysis that arguably is psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
Like we know that information. We just need our brain to feel different, like I'm not drinking because I sat down and did the math and then was like, oh, I don't know how to count. Well, I keep losing. I can't count beyond 3. So who knows? Like it isn't that. It's that this feels good. I feel bad. I come up with ways to feel good because that's what my brain is designed to do. And like, salt, sugar, fat, dopamine. Like we seek it out, and if something gets in the way, we find a way around it. So
I think, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
As you were talking to, I was like, oh yeah, there's paragraph 2 of my Psychology Today profile, right? Because it's broken into these 3 main sections. Is like, here's what I know to be true, is that people want to be moderate drinkers. Like that's kind of what they aspire to as the kind of gold standard for healthy, right? But what I know to be true is that moderate drinkers do not actively moderate their drinking, which is to say it is an adjective to describe their behavior. It is not the verb they are using to acquire the behavior. They're not actively thinking, okay, so if I had someone, and if I know I have an event on Friday and I'm going to have 4 drinks and 7 per week for women is kind of like the standard in the US, the guideline. So I'm not going to have drinks 4 days this week and then I'll have the 4 on Wednesday. Like, people who are truly moderate drinkers, which is to say they just drink when they want to and only when they want to, and they never drink more than they want to, they're not actively doing that. It's just it's like we're looking at this result and then trying to codify how to make that happen.
Yeah, that's kind of my experience, is that no one's actually doing the recommendation. They're just figuring out that they don't do the recommendation and then saying, oh, I guess I need to like do the recommendation, but then when they do therapy, they just stop most of the time or cut back to like whiskey at Christmas,
Right.
But I just don't know a ton of people who've come in, and I mean, I don't do what you do, but I just don't know a ton of people that are like, yeah, I'm drinking 30 beers a week. All right, thank you. I got to 3. That's fun. Like it just tends to just be something that you don't need or you move on from, or something, your relationship to it changes, which means that it's not where all of your intellectual energy is going. And that may not be your experience at all. Well, but I just don't see a ton of people that are like, yep, I've had my 7 for the week. Restarting next. Like, it's just like, it's not coming up if you're not doing it. No one's doing the FDA recommendation.
Well, or they are using it as sort of a prison for themselves, and then they feel like they are a crappy human being when that doesn't work for them, like to just say. And so what I find, most of the people I work with, they are not going to seek out therapy for substance use issues because they don't really qualify for it, which quite honestly, yes, we've got the DSM and we've got substance use disorder, but this idea of alcoholic is a self-diagnostic term. And so there's this like fuzzy space of, well, do I talk, like if I'm drinking the way the people around me are drinking, is that something I go to therapy for? And the answer is not really. Which is why you're saying you don't see a lot of it, right? Like most of my people either are therapists or have been in therapy or are currently in therapy, and they're in therapy to deal with the trauma and the relationships, you know. And then this drinking is kind of this side thing where maybe we ask about it at intake and we as professionals clock it as not, you know, substance use disorder. And then it just kind of goes by the wayside.
Yeah, I don't have a drinking problem. I have my therapist keeps bringing up my drinking problem.
Yes, exactly. But so, or even their therapist maybe drinks at the same level they do, and it's like, yeah, that's fine. Because so for my people, what I love is there's this spectrum out there that Jolene Park started, and it's called, or she didn't start it actually, she popularized it, kind of like made it more common vernacular, is gray area drinking, which is kind of like this drinking in the gray area between healthy and abuse or addicted.
Well, and I like that because it isn't people calling addiction one thing. Like I see on LinkedIn and at, you know, not festivals, what do you call them? Conferences all the time. Like the hardcore 12-step guys yelling at the non 12-step people about how both are wrong. And I kind of disagree with both of them, you know, but it's like, you can admit that like addiction is a problem, but not all addiction is the same. You know, but it's that fight about like that all or nothing. And I know that 12-step, you have to kind of buy into that in order to stay sober at the beginning. And some people need that. But then there's people that are angry that it's extrapolated to everybody. And gray area drinking just seems a lot more general. Like I've never brought that up to somebody and had them be like, no, absolutely, I'm not a gray area drinker. You know, like they're usually like,
I think where it gets confusing though is, so now we can, you know, self-label as gray area drinkers. At what point then do we gauge, well, where is healthy gray area drinking and where's unhealthy? Well, it's gray. It's hard to say, right? So I have pulled out a subset of the people, and these now are the people I work with. And then I work with a different group of people that we can get into. But as far as drinking habits and alcohol goes, there's this subset of people that I call Groundhog Day drinkers, which is they're in the gray area. So that's kind of part of it. But another criteria that applies to them, and there are 3 types of Groundhog Day drinkers. So I kind of have like I have like a video I could share if anyone were listening. We're like, oh my gosh, I need that video. Like they could just reach out to me and say, can you send me the types of Groundhog Day drinkers video, and I'll send it. But when you're a Groundhog Day drinker, it doesn't matter. It's not about amount or frequency. It doesn't matter how long ago or how recent your last drink was or how many you had. It's that feeling of Groundhog Day, which I love a good 90s rom-com, and Groundhog Day is that 1993 Bill Murray, Andy McDowell movie, right?
They're still making them as a genre. Like, I don't know. Have you seen Little Italy?
Yes. Well, because it was like a jumping off platform for just this idea. But I love it. But so it's that idea, I call them Groundhog Day drinkers because it's that idea of they have a drink, however many they're going to have, whether it's a few or a lot or whatever. But it's that next morning waking up and that repeated, I just wish I hadn't had that one or had that last one or had those extra or gone to that event at all. It's that feeling of, why can't I just stick to my goals? And that's what makes a Groundhog Day drinker. It's not about, and I have been every type of Groundhog Day drinker. And actually, if we have time for a soapbox, I will climb on the soapbox about what we're getting taught about it is bass backwards. But the thing is about all of them, it's not about how many you've had. If I had one drink, I woke up thinking, God, why did I even have the one? I just should have stuck with my 0. If I drank a bottle of wine, it was, God, why did I do that? I should have just stuck with the one I was going to let myself have. But it's that repeated morning of whatever I did is not what I set out to do. And so that's why I call them Groundhog Day drinkers. And I think that gives this subset of the gray area population something a little more tangible to say, okay, so I'm in the gray area. How do I know if it needs addressing or not?
Yeah. And so then how do you go about treating that if somebody comes in and that's their experience?
Yeah, so I treat it using, I have a 3-pillar approach that I call the trifecta of change, because I love the word trifecta so much. It just feels good to me.
Does it mean it's like 3 things together, right?
Yeah.
Is it the same as triumvirate? They're different?
Is it? I don't know, because I know the word triumvirate. I'm a former English teacher, by the way.
Okay. Wow.
So like words are my thing. I love it, but I feel like I could go down a rabbit hole of where words are the same and are not the same. And what I love about trifecta is this idea of 3 things that come together and make something powerful. And so in those 3 pillars, which kind of to answer your question of how do I treat it, is we walk through these 3 pillars, and part of the challenge is that the 3 pillars, much like with trauma healing, right, are not a linear sequence where we don't go, okay, let's do pillar 1 for 2 weeks, and then we're going to do pillar 2. They're not steps. Having grown up in Houston, I always liken it to, hurricanes would come through and we get all of these floods, and then people would raise their houses and start to put pillars under the houses. And you don't just like jack up one corner of the house.
You have to do
6
all
feet
of it.
and then you have to do a little bit and then go around and a little bit more to each pillar and then go and add a little more to each pillar. So the whole thing slowly rises. So part of treating it is figuring out how the nuances of how to add which pillar at which time, because Groundhog Day drinkers are all different, right?
So you're saying that instead of doing steps like a hierarchy, being able to do multiple things at once has a synergistic effect where they are all stronger.
Yes, thank you for saying that in such a succinct way for me.
I think I answered my question too, in that like the triumvirate implies limitation on 3 on power, like Rome, and trifecta is the synergistic effect making them all stronger. So I was curious.
So everyone go take your SATs now and score high on the English, because those words will be on there.
Can you go through like what some of those steps are, or how you work, frame it, where Brainspotting comes into that, whatever you feel like is helpful?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Just tell me when to stop. Just cut me off when you need to.
I have my tea here that I'm drinking for the
oh yeah, it's beautiful.
the non-drinking episode.
There you go. Yeah, I've got my water.
Never drink.
Okay. So the different pillars. So the first pillar, and because there does have to be a first, like you have to start somewhere, even though it is really synergistic. The first one is the first one because it's the easiest to put in place and does not have Brainspotting in it yet. And it's just what I call, it's the personalized daily support plan, which for most people so let's just stick with, and I don't know when this episode's going to get published, but we're recording at a time where the holidays are about to hit in the US, and New Year's Eve is coming up, New Year's resolutions, which historically for the Groundhog Day drinking
is coming up around the dinner table.
Politics is also coming up, but also the idea of dry January is real big in the Groundhog Day drinking community. And so what happens with dry January is everyone approaches it like this: let's just take a break. Let's just take a break from alcohol. It's a 30-day break, a reset. And oh gosh, I'm about to mix my metaphors. Let me get back on. We'll get to that one in a minute. So what happens is people start to share strategies, right? And they'll say things like, yeah, like if I want to drink, I'm just going to go for a walk. And then a Groundhog Day drinker will say, okay, well then this works for all of these people. They just take a break. They just cut it out for 30 days. And if they want to drink, they just go for a walk. And then when that person goes for a walk and then still pours a glass of wine, they think they're the problem. When really the walk wasn't the daily support they needed. So we have to personalize the daily support, which is true for all of our clients, right? Like, even up to, very, very complex, extremely complex PTSD, right? Like we need to personalize how we're self-soothing. And so that's the first pillar is, I call it a values-based nurture plan, where it's almost like an acceptance and commitment therapy type activity where we really hone down, well, what are the person's values and how do we build a support program out of their unique values?
Yeah.
And what I think is great about that is that I've never seen two people have the exact same set. Like it just is, it's a really easy way to individualize. So that's the first pillar we put in because it is the easiest and the fastest to put in.
Mm-hmm.
Is we get our value-based nurture plan, and then we talk about, okay, what does it look like to implement this plan? And then we build in the supports for implementing it. The second pillar of the trifecta is the subcortical change, which is just straight, this is where we learn how to do brain spotting. And my clients, because we're not working on clinical things, they have the option to brain spot with me in a group, which we'll do every couple of weeks. And I'm giving them guided audios and kind of a calendar, a customizable calendar of, okay, do this self brain spotting exercise X number of times. So it's a very like self-paced.
Is that like a free spotting type exercise or something?
No, because I am still using 4, sometimes 5, depending on the person, really specific setups for it. But we are always coming at it more, I say always, but nothing's ever certain in brain spotting. We are attempting most of the time to come at it from a resource place because it is self-led brain spotting, not clinician-led brain spotting. So we bring that piece in, they learn the different setups, they do the guided audios. It's almost like if you think about, a lot of people ask me, well, I don't want to go to meetings. Like I don't meetings are not what do it for me. And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want to go to meetings either. I also don't want to lead meetings. So I liken it more to a group workout class, like a group fitness class, where you don't go and it, like at the beginning you talk to people because maybe you know them because you see them there all the time because you've all got like class pass and you're at the same classes all the time. But you're not then telling them, here's what the workout was like for me. Oh, I went, I was going to order a cheeseburger last night. Like you're not really sharing all of that. You're just going in, kind of maybe talking about, okay, today the goal is legs. We're all going to work on our legs, right? So maybe they come in and I say, okay, today the goal is we're going to do the crocodile setup. So we're all working on, creating one synergized story around alcohol. And then we do it. So it's more like a workout class for your brain than it is like a meeting per se. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I've heard that there's some places, I don't think there's one in Birmingham, but I've heard from some people that live in other cities that there's like basically like moderation groups where they just like get around and talk about moderation and kind of health and try and have accountability without total sobriety.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of the gray area, right? Like, and the beauty of the ever connected age we live in, right? Which is you can jump online and find a community that matches what you're looking for. And I think that's what's unique about my community of people too, is while I don't work solely with entrepreneurs, I do work a lot with entrepreneurs. And it's that mindset of, I want to get out of this unhealthy relationship with alcohol, not because I want to, necessarily have stellar health or I want to, beat an addiction, which is true for some of my people, but the vast majority are people who like, they're just too effing busy trying to run a business to be held back by the ankle weight of alcohol. Like it's for those, like nobody's got time and energy for that. They've got bigger things they need to be accomplishing. So
I think when you get people to realize how much time it actually is taking up, because it's like, oh yeah, okay, there's a mistake, whatever, and you realize like, okay, you slept till this time, and then the rest of the day was still kind of a waste because you're not firing on all cylinders, and now you're behind for the week, and now your sleep's behind, so you're tired. Like it just, and I think too, like for people in the gray area, like tiredness becomes a trigger, but then alcohol makes you tireder, but then it makes you wake up a little bit while you're drinking it, but then it still makes your quality of sleep terrible, and it becomes this vicious thing. And I don't know if you like go into like a lot of the psychoeducation about like the way that it works in the brain, but I think that's one of the nefarious things about it, and why it's one of those drugs that's like allowed, quote unquote, where a lot of them are not, is that it's a stimulant and a depressant in different parts of the brain at the same time.
Yes.
And so you're kind of addicted to one half of it, and then the other one is a problem, some of the time.
Yeah, well, and perfect segue, thank you, into the third pillar, which is I vacillate kind of between, or oscillate, I'm getting in my head about more words now. between informed decision making and embodied decision making, because the pillar is the same either way, but it's that idea of, first we got to know these things, right? Like if I'm having a glass of wine at night or a glass of whiskey at night because I think it helps me sleep, well, I need to get some updated information on that, right? But the problem that most of my Groundhog Day drinkers have is that knowing it is insufficient. And that's why we have this Groundhog Day phenomenon, because as you and I know, like we learn in this one part of our brain, and we, that information is stored in a different part than this like intrinsic drive. And even just to go back to, and I don't know if you have more updated stats on this, but like how the decision-making time or the action time between the subcortical and the neocortex or the prefrontal cortex, where like subcortical is moving, or amygdala, I guess, is moving at like 0.03 milliseconds, which I guess is like, or 0.03 seconds, which I guess is like 30 milliseconds, versus 0.7 seconds for the top, which is like 23 times as slow. I mean, it's lightning fast in the difference, but that's 23 times as slow, right? And so what I'll tell people is that's why alcohol, the way you're describing it too, with this, like the vicious, nefarious cycle of sleep, is it's like an ankle weight, right? Like we put 2 to 5 pound weights on our ankles and we can walk around for, 10 minutes, 23 times that, 230 minutes, you may start to notice it. Maybe you wear it, for an hour, try it for 23 hours. It's going to be a noticeable difference. But it eats away very slowly when we're Groundhog Day drinkers versus full on, high level substance use disorder. The impact is just a lot. I mean, nefarious really is the right word, right? Because it's so subtle, but it's compounding. And so that's why the third pillar is the informed decision making and the embodied decision making, because we need to learn that information. And then we need that information. So we talked earlier, and I know you and I talked kind of pre-podcast about this on our phone call, about the idea of like the one continuous story, and, like that being like a solid way to describe it, but not really sure scientifically how that's working out, other than neurons that fire together, wire together. But that third piece being, well, how do I embody information? And it's that difference between knowing something and like knowing something.
Yeah.
And so that's the third pillar, is first of all, let's get some stuff and let's know it, but then let's like know it so that you act from that knowledge, not just beat yourself up with the knowledge like a guilt stick later on Groundhog Day.
Well, and I think it's that like intellectual memory is tied to like referencing the future and referencing the past, but it doesn't affect me right now. You know, like it's like I'm going to drink right now so that I don't drink later on, and then that way I'll get it out of the way, or whatever. You know, like, but it's not feeling. It's not felt or experiential. It's not embodied.
Exactly.
It's exactly. a memory that we're kind of referencing about something that isn't my behavior right now. But, everybody who has their last cigarette for, 5 years or something.
Yeah, exactly. And very similarly, how right now me that's waking up saying I'm never going to drink again is not the same me that's like at this level of drinking. People aren't crawling out of bed and pouring a drink. So it's not happening at the same time. They're not even wanting a drink until hours later, when they've been fighting with the kids all day and running their business all day and are trying to finally settle down and quiet their business running brain, which, you as a business owner know, like that's a tall order to not take work home with you when you are so actively involved in a business, right? Like it's very different than being an employee. And so then, because there's such a huge time delay in those two experiences, like you said, that information is not accessible in that moment.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant. It appears to be irrelevant in that moment, even though it's as relevant as anything else in the world could be.
Well, it's not me and my reality that I'm thinking about. It's what I did before that I feel bad about, and what I'm going to do different tomorrow. But it's not what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah. So those are the three pillars. That's how we do a little bit at a time on each one, weave them all together, and snap, crackle, pop, the trifecta.
And you do a lot of other stuff too. I mean, you don't just see people who are doing gray area drinking. I mean, you do kind of coaching with other people or other types of issues.
I do, yeah. I do. My second biggest part of what I would call my caseload, which is not, I mean, I guess anyone can call it a caseload, right? Like, I'm like, not to sound clinical, is just really high performing folks who are dealing. So when I was practicing under my license, my specialties were anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. So now I've just kind of taken that a few notches down, and I'm working still with business owners. At this point now, they are not drinking, because that's kind of like the order of operations. Or I say not drinking. They're no longer concerned about their relationship with alcohol. They're at a healthy level and it matches what they want.
Mhm.
And they're no longer actively moderating. They're just either
Mhm.
drinking or not drinking at what is
They're
no
doing
longer
what
the
they
fight for
want, and
them.
that's lining up with what they want to do.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. And so then we work on things like people pleasing, healthy boundaries, a lot of attachment stuff, but again, not the trauma end of it, which is hard. It's a fine line to walk, right? And I know there are a lot of coaches out there who don't take that line very seriously. And they'll end up doing trauma work, even not as a licensed clinician. I have a huge, soapbox about that. I think if you're going to be doing that level of work, you need to be working with someone who is following all of the ethical and state licensing things in your area. But
Well,
so, and
it is an important line, but it is kind of a gray one. It's like trauma is
yeah,
sort of in everything, but when you're really digging into something, how deep can I go? You understand why
yeah.
people get lost, but yeah, you do hear some coaches on Instagram talking about, stuff, and it's like, well, what are you doing?
It gets a little cringy. And
Well, and
but
then the
so
crystal starts coming out, the yoga starts coming out. That's where I'm really, that's where I get really nervous, is that it's like, I got a lot of crystals in my office, but they're not medical interventions, It's,
right. Well, and I love I support all forms, whatever works for whatever person. But if we're going to be talking trauma, it needs to be
mhm,
someone with some sort of license.
mhm.
Um, just because there's a governing body, and there are repercussions for the person if harm does come out of it, right? Like, if you're working with a coach, you don't really have a lot of repercussions.
Well, you're bound by the laws that the person who receives the service has active in their state. And you don't know the laws of 50 states a lot of the time. So
Right.
if I get online and I say that I'm a therapist and you receive services to me as a therapist, and that's a regulated term in your state. I mean, I think hypnosis is only regulated in all but is only 3 states. But I mean, depending on the intervention you're doing, you can't say you do it without a certain kind of license. And you look at
Right.
the internet, it's the Wild West. Nobody even knows the laws that they're breaking. Like,
Exactly. Well,
which
exactly.
means
That's
you
like,
don't. I mean, when I used to do liability training with churches, would go in and be like, "This is why you have to have the window here and whatever." And somebody would be like, "But what if somebody has to?" And I'd be like, "Stop, look in my eyes, pretend I'm on a jury, say what you're going to say," and then they would be like, "Well," sit down.
yep.
And I mean, like that's my line is with clinicians at Taproot, is like, imagine that what you're writing is being read in court. Would you still
Yeah.
write that thing?
Yes. And we say that with my group of friends that are all therapists too. But I guess kind of what I was getting at is, so with that in my background and doing the work I do as a coach, we may not be coming in for that, but I am more than equipped to handle and recognize if and when it comes up,
Mhm.
to where it's not like I don't have to put the brakes on and be like, stop, we have entered trauma area.
Yeah.
I cannot do this, right? Like, I can continue to hold that space and
Mhm.
let that process complete, and then say, listen, as a licensed clinician and not working with you under that license, what I know is that was a clinical something, and then I can help them find the appropriate resources.
Yeah.
So it's that piece of recognizing that it's out of the scope of what I'm practicing right now, and B,
Mhm.
still being able to hold that as it comes up, and not
Yeah.
having it, because I think it can be really harmful if it comes up with someone, even let's say as someone is not licensed. And I'm not trying to knock other coaches by any stretch of the imagination, but like you said, the internet is the Wild West, right? Like, and so
Well, I mean, a lot of the
someone may,
people saying that they do coaching are not even licensed as coaches,
well,
like
there
they're
is
just
no license.
saying,
I mean, there's no governing body for it. Like, even like
yeah,
I have a coaching certification, but it's because someone decided to
out of
make a
class.
coaching
Yeah.
certification, right? Like,
There's not a state or national board that's over what you're doing.
nope. And there's no ethics committee
But
for it
I
that
just
I'm
mean
aware
that
of
there's
yet.
people that are saying, like, I'm a coach that decided that that was what they were going to call themselves yesterday.
Yeah, it's a self-diagnostic label as well.
Yeah.
Um, But so even let's say even if a coach is really, you know, all about best practices and helping people heal and will recognize, oh, trauma, you know, came out, they still might not be able to handle a person in that state, and they may do more harm even with the best of intentions, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's one
And
of
you're
the
not
benefits of,
there. You don't know what happens when the person gets off. You may never see him again because you're doing teletherapy, So
right. Well, not
yeah,
teletherapy, telecoaching.
yeah, telecoaching. Yeah. Tell us something.
Yeah,
Um,
tell us something. But yeah, so it is, I mean, there's just a lot of nuance to the work. So all that to say, the other people I work with tend to be really high performing, people pleasing, mostly business owners. We do a lot of brain spotting around perfectionism, healthy boundaries, money. Shit. Can I cuss on your podcast?
oh yeah, please. We try
Oh,
and be
okay,
sensitive.
money shit.
I just
And
feel
that would
like
be
there's enough podcasts out there. I mean, I'm not going out of my way to be offensive or something, but I
right.
also have just had an axe to grind for a long time that I feel like mysticism and psychology can be like funny because it is hysterical.
Oh, it
And
is
that,
hilarious.
yeah, there's just all of these podcasts where they're like, here's the 10 tips to stay healthy in spring by eating broccoli. And you're just like, I don't want another one of those podcasts. Like, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that, like, or
yeah.
even the Jungian people, which are some of the, cooler therapists some of the time. It's like I think one of the reasons this Jungian life was so successful is just because they spoke English. I mean, where you had like other people that then are just like, the power of the archetype is so strong. You have to be careful. It's like your office isn't a strip mall, man. Come on, like,
Well, and I think
like
what happens too, even just from a marketing perspective, is that there are people who then aren't going to come in because they don't have that like chilled out, like zened out vibe where that
yeah.
speaks to them, right? So they do need to be more of us who are like, anyways, this shit is freaking nuts, right?
Well, I feel like it's
And we
hard
need
for
we need to
business
talk about
owners
it.
to find therapy sometimes because a lot of times the therapists are like threatened by it or something. Like there's like they view it as like I don't know what the word for it. You know what I mean? You see that
Yeah.
energy come up. I mean, because I've done
It's a power
business.
differential, a power dynamic
Yeah, I
that
mean, like
the therapist needs to address in their own therapy.
yeah. Well, I mean that again. And I don't know that it's like getting it done and leveling up. I think it's knowing that you're not done is the thing. Like I know where the shadow is in the room because I'll tell you. Like it's
Yeah.
the person that's like,
Well,
oh no, I did CBT for 6 years. I'm all better. That's
yeah.
you don't know where that
Well,
shadow is in there.
and I think too, like how beautifully, when I found the brain spotting community, I was like, these are my freaking people. Like, where
Oh
have you
yeah.
been? And I think that the uncertainty principle is part of what makes it my people, because I have an absolute love-hate relationship with uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with anxiety and OCD because those are experiences that I can really connect with, and that just like need to latch on and feel a sense of certainty and a sense of control over things I have no control over, and how healing is not how do I find better ways to control it, but is rather how do I release control, which is now we got to talk quietly about our crystals and releasing control. But at the end of the day, that's what it really is. And so the uncertainty principle was a freaking game changer for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I hate it. I want no part of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the freaking worst. And it's the best at the same time.
Well, I think that's how and I mean, it may not be the kind of stuff that you're doing, but like with trauma therapy, like I don't listen a ton to what people are saying as much
Right.
as like what they're feeling. And that's the thing is like you can figure out pretty quickly. Yeah, you're afraid of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow, and guess what? You don't know. Like you might get
Yeah.
hit by a bus. What does that do to you? What's going on in your body? I'm
Yeah.
not saying I hope you get hit by a bus. I'm saying let's not talk about what you're in control of. Let's talk about what you're running from because
Yeah.
I'm expensive and you like to change.
Right.
Like
You're paying
yeah,
by the hour, friend.
yes, and but people will map that somatically so quickly. I mean, their posture just shows you. Like what happens to them, and it's like it looks like you're wearing a backpack, or it looks like you want to hide something, or it looks like you want to just let go and disappear.
Can I
And
tell you? Just so interrupting. During
no,
one of
this is an
my
interrupting podcast. You want to push back? Right?
during one of my brain spotting sessions with my own therapist, and so just a little self-disclosure here, most of my parts show up as cartoon characters, as animated characters or childhood characters, like from Never Ending Story. So if they're not animated, they're still very like
Any
the
anime
luck,
in there?
the luck dragon. No anime. That was never really
That's
my
kind of a
thing. It's
Gen
more
Z
like,
thing.
yeah, it's more. I am not Gen Z. I'm a Zennial, so I'm in that like weird sweet spot. But it would be more like, oh, but anyway. So then my backpack literally showed up as this little Disney character that like clung on my back, and I was like, and we named he was my backpack. But it's just you said you could physically see a person when they had their backpack, and I had a somatic experience just you saying that, and I was like, oh yeah, my little backpack guy, and like I can picture him, and I'm like, people who are watching the video are like, gosh, she's gesturing a lot.
Yeah, I like back before I did any kind of brain spotting or even EMDR or anything, I was doing like a lot of kind of like meditation and hypnosis stuff, and so like whenever there was somebody who came in that like didn't know that they were angry, I would just start doing because it was all customized to you. People I think thought I was going by script or whatever, but it was like what you could see the somatic thing. But I'd always just be like, you're walking in the woods and the straps of your backpack are very hard, they're digging into your shoulders. You feel it in your shoulder blades, you feel it in your knees, but only you can carry the backpack because you have to do it. And you're resentful and you feel the sweat, and I'll take the backpack off. It's like, because you can, once you just make somebody feel the thing, you can see how it's showing up somatically in their posture immediately and just help them.
Well, and that's the attunement piece, right? That's the attunement. And I get on that soapbox all the time with so I'm a brain spotting consultant as well. So I've helped people go through the certification process, right? And I lead a free monthly consultation group on it. And so many of our conversations around it it's not the setup. The setup is sexy.
Yeah.
Because it's got this series of steps. We can say, well, which setup is right for this and which setup is right for that. And
it's the fun metaphor somebody came up with that they're proud of. It's cool sounding, but it's not the work. And
it's not the work, and it's not the thing. It's the vehicle for the setup is the vehicle. The thing is the uncertainty and the attunement. Anyways, I'm not going to climb on that zone.
Well, the uncertainty on the behalf of the clinician too, because like I've said this before, but it's like
that's who I was talking about for both of them.
Oh, I can teach you how to hold the stick, and I can teach you that when the pupil does this, then you maybe need to bounce a little bit, or that you need to check and see if they actually are on Adderall, even though they're saying they're not on Adderall, or maybe it's just not, whatever. Like I can tell you all that, but when the patient is liking it and going into the uncertainty and feeling a distressing thing that no one else has helped them connect with, and you put the stick down, because I don't want to make people feel bad. You haven't done your own work and you don't know that there's a good thing on the other side of the bad thing. I cannot teach you that. Go to therapy. You're not ready to do brain spotting.
Yeah. Well, and you haven't, I would say on top of that, maybe you've not had that experience for yourself, and go get a practice partner and experience it. Because the second you have that, you're like, oh my God, I'm so glad that person did not move that pointer. I will share, I had that. And I, a lot of times when I'm assisting with Fry, I'll share this experience, because in my very first phase 1, my very first demo or practicum, right, was the outside window, and I looked everywhere except for that pointer. I mean, I was all over the place, but I always knew where it was, and I always felt really appreciative that the person just held it there, because it felt like it is the thing that kept me from flying into outer space, which we would call, like kept me from flying out of my window of tolerance, or, moving in and out of dissociation. But it was like, I needed it there more than I would have thought. I would have thought, okay, once you find the eye position, then like, there it is. But I needed that person to be holding that place, so I didn't have to manage that. It was like, I could go wherever and come back to it. And it was just a really powerful experience. Yeah. And so going back to having had that experience, I will hold that thing until the end of time. And I'll be like, let me know when you're ready for me to put it down. And I don't know if you ever have this where, and I don't know if this is you too, where like there really always is a pointer within arm's reach for me. And I will be holding it and I'll say, okay, and just let me know when you're ready. And they'll go, okay. And I don't know if they're okay meant I'm ready, or okay, I'll let you know. So I'll hold it. And eventually they'll be like, you can put that down. I'm like, okay, then I will put it down. Because I take so seriously not putting it down until a person is ready for it.
Yeah. Yeah. They're totally in control, and they know that they're in control, even though you're holding the space.
And similarly, when someone says, I need you to put that down, and they mean it because they can't, like that is it being up is what pushes them out of the window of tolerance. Yeah, I believe you. away it
Yeah,
goes.
these are the ETT ones. When
Yeah,
you do the color stuff.
the color stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
cool.
you have the traditional pointer too.
Yeah.
Well, that so where do you see as like the place that therapy needs to go? You know, like you have started, you end up in brain spotting, like you're kind of describing the thing that I noticed where people who are open to brain spotting and get into it, even if I know nothing else about them, I know that they were okay with something that wasn't a hierarchical system of steps. If this happens, then do that. Do the 12 movements. And then, like I know that they're going to be open, and that's generally going to be the kind of clinician that somebody's asking for when they say, what's the first thing to look for? It's not that, I mean, I think brain spotting works for an amazing amount of people. It's like one of the wider nets out there. But even if you don't need that exactly, you're going to end up with somebody who's open to uncertainty,
And
and
attunement. Yeah.
and open to just letting something happen where a lot of the models don't make room. I mean, where do you see yourself and just the profession like heading, post that?
Ooh, that feels like a big question. I see myself trying to remember that, and this maybe is not at all what you were asking, but it's where it goes, which is case in point. I see myself finding out more about the ways to make this accessible to people outside of the therapy room, which is kind of what I love about the coaching aspect, and about how brain spotting doesn't much very unlike lots of other modalities where like the licensed clinicians have a lockdown on it. It's not that way with brain spotting. For better or for worse, kind of depending on who you talk to. But I think that making it more widely communicated to people that it's not only for trauma. And I tell people too, part of how I picked brain spotting and got into brain spotting is because I did not want to be a trauma therapist. And, I was a little baby therapist and I didn't want to deal with trauma. And everyone who is a therapist is laughing right now going, ha ha ha, that's impossible. It all stems from trauma, right? Like, and so I
People
got
still
into the
say
therapy
it.
space. Yeah. And I got into the therapy space and I was like, well, shit, it turns out, which goes back to even with coaching, right? Like if you're truly hitting, like not hitting people where it hurts, but like getting deep in with coaching, you're going to bump up against a little bit of trauma. It's really unlikely that you won't.
Well, it
which is
informs
why
your purpose and your life's trajectory
yes,
and all the stuff you're going to coaching for. But there's difference in
yes,
understanding how that informs your life and making it conscious and really
yes,
trying to dig into somatic chunks of stuff that is
yes.
hard to get out of the subcortical brain. I mean, there's just two different things, but yeah, you're in conversation with it. It's just
Right. But so working with a coach who has that background and knows even what to do when you do butt up against the trauma, right? But so what happened is I was having this realization of like, well, shit, turns out I'm going to be a trauma therapist because all of my clients have some varying level of traumatic experience that needs to be cleared out, right? And my population also did not. I work with a lot of people, and by the time I closed my practice, a lot of my clients did realize they had trauma. But when I was, early starting on, there was a lot of like, not really.
yeah.
Like, no, my life has been pretty good. Not a lot of traumatic things have happened, and then come to find out that things that maybe the broader world would not have called traumatic, but were in fact very heavily traumatic for that person.
Well, I think
Did take
trauma
place.
is like it's
Subjective.
become, well, I like that trauma is more the focus of therapy now and gets brought up a
Yeah.
lot, but I also feel like in doing that, it's become too big of a word. And
Well,
then
and
like
yeah,
there's strain trauma, there's acute trauma, and there's also just like, I know that, like, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm calling all of this trauma because it's become too big of a word, but like you witness something in Iraq, your buddy gets blown up, you keep re-experiencing that as a flashback. That's PTSD, that's trauma.
right.
Okay. I see dad hit the wall one time and almost hit me, but then he never did hit me, but I thought he might. And I've got this strain trauma of that went on all the time. And so my body was ready for it, even though it didn't happen, but I didn't have the experience. So I'm not allowed to have it. So it's not
Or you're
traumatic.
gaslighting yourself.
Yeah.
right?
So
Like
there's
I'm having a
that.
reaction to something that didn't really happen, like self-gaslighting, which is a
Well,
whole soapbox with me and
yeah,
CBT. But anyways,
so we're calling that strain trauma now, right?
yeah,
Which
yeah,
I'm glad there's room for that. But then there's also like everybody said the family is normal and fun, and this is what it's good, and it's supposed to be like this. But I knew that this wasn't normal and fun or right, but I called it that with language in my head.
yeah,
But I knew something was wrong for 18 years, and now I can't.
yeah.
That is trauma too. But it's like we're putting, and then I could go on, but you kind of know what I mean there.
I do. Well, and what you're making a case of point for, you're making a case for my point, which was most of my clients did not recognize their trauma and so I was sitting there like between EMDR and brain spotting going, okay, which one, am I going to like set up shop with? Because I did not have the budget to do both. And I knew my people, I love them so much, and they are Googlers, and they're going to research the shit out of anything.
Mhm.
And I knew the second they Googled EMDR, it was going to be PTSD, veterans, and all these
Yeah.
things, and they were going to immediately dismiss it
VA studies.
versus brain spotting, they were going to Google and be like, I don't really know, like it's not really out there. So I then tried to really hard tackle the SEO in my area for brain spotting. And
Yeah.
I dove straight into it because I wanted to be the first person to speak it into existence for
The
them.
biggest variable for SEO is time too.
Yes. So that I could speak it in a way that made it not about the trauma. Like, yes, it does that, but it's so much more than that. And I think that's
Mhm.
true of all these subcore, because people will be like, well, EMDR is great for all that too. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying if you Google it, good luck.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was how
Well, the
kind of I
rigidity of
got
that
led to
model
brain spotting.
too, like the EMDR. I mean, one of the reasons that I left is that I was saying, "Hey, I'm noticing that the pupil wibbles here,
Yeah.
and that the person has a reaction on that spot. And when I stop there, they visualize things from the experience, do the 15 movements. They're holy and handed down by Shapiro, and you can't change the 15. And it's like, why am I paying for $300 an hour for a consultation where you're telling me the number 15 over and over? Like,
Yeah.
I can read, and
Yeah.
there's no ability to evolve,
I
and
do.
she's
And I do. I know many, many EMDR therapists who are evolving with it. And I think that's amazing. I just think when people like you and David came out and said, hey, I'm noticing this, it sounds like you just
well, he
it's
did
a
that as a
shame, right? Like it's a
yeah.
shame that you weren't met with more curiosity.
Well, but Shapiro said if you change EMDR, you're not doing my EMDR.
Which is
Whereas David
true.
said this is
But
supposed to go on and change.
yeah,
And so, the free spotting people can say they do brain spotting, but
yeah,
evolved EMDR, according to the founder, is not EMDR.
yeah. Well, and I don't know. I got out of the rabbit hole of EMDR, so I can speak to what my understanding is, but it's all going to be opinion, not
Yeah.
informed decisions, which again is my third pillar. So I try not to do it.
Mhm.
But like, yeah, I do. That was how I say I stumbled into brain spotting. That was how brain spotting chose me, is because
Mhm.
I needed something that my people were not going to Google and immediately dismiss, because they were already dismissing the fact that they had trauma. Not dismissing, but they were already on the stand, taking a stand of, that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to process trauma. I'm not having flashbacks, because they weren't having what flashbacks look like in the movie, right? But gosh, that was a whole long conversation that stemmed out of us just talking about like, who else do I work with?
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's
but
it.
I
Those are
think
my
like
folks.
brain spotting, you find the more things in the file because there is this openness. Like, even if somebody Googles EMDR and they see somebody say, actually, you can use EMDR for creativity, and that's result number one on Google, you're still sitting there being like, what do you want to treat? What is it like? How is that affecting you? What's the bad experience? What's the thing? With brain spotting, it's just kind of like, I don't know, feel the energy, look at a stick. And then your body, your brain is just smarter than any analyst. It's smarter than any patient. Your deep brain will tell you what it is. And sometimes we really want it to be page one of the file. And we're just talking about that in CBT or something. And then you just let go for a minute and get the front of the brain out of the way. And brain spotting's like, here's all the other paper in that file, man. It's a lot of other things are on that same, you felt trapped, network.
Which full circle is so true around alcohol, right? Like
Yeah.
people think it's just about, I don't want to crave it and I want to not have a craving. And it's not. It is so woven in, and it is a web in social relationships and family relationships and our relationship to our business and our bodies. And it's so woven in. It's really hard just to say, I just don't want to crave it, or I'm just going to take a break. That's, I know, and I'll wrap up soon. That's one of my main soapboxes that I get on. And this is actually, I have in addition to the what type of Groundhog Day drinker are you, I do have another free training I can share with anyone who's interested, but where I talk about 3 of these points. But one of my main points is, if we're going to take a 30-day break from drinking, that to me, and we're going to call it a reset. And yes, there are physical things that happen in those 30 days. Like, that is undeniable. But to me, that is, and we're going to finish the 30 days and then say, okay, now I'm going to go towards moderating, right? Because I've realized I don't need it. I don't want it as much. I'm much healthier without it. I feel so much better. But the problem is, we've effectively taken our dirty laundry, shoved it in the corner for 30 days and said, well, yeah, now I don't smell it. I don't have to look at it. Like, I don't have to deal with it, but the laundry's still not clean. Like, we didn't actually solve the problem. We just shoved it in the closet for 30 days. And then when we get it back out, to then say, now these clothes are clean, it's a damn lie. Is what it is,
well, I mean, what happens is your tolerance went down, so you're drinking less just because it's affecting you more, and it'll take 3 months for it to creep back up, and then January's here again,
and then you're on Groundhog Day.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. It's interesting too, because like the younger generations are pretty, I mean, things maybe could change, but the data has stayed pretty consistent that people drink less. And there's certain things like
they're savvy.
Like, yeah, like they're risk averse. I mean, some of it I think is that whatever you call it, Delta, 10 or whatever, but they can get marijuana easier, some of them, but there's also just like there's a risk averseness. And like you just looking at like market trends and things like wine, like when boomers are not drinking anymore, like wine is gone. Like as an industry, there's the only sectors that have grown for like 5 years are like investment bottles, like over $300 a bottle, and like buzz balls that you get at a gas station that are like under $5.
But when we think about the genius of alcohol as a money-making franchise or a money-making company, like, way to do it. When you start to realize the number of conversions you're about to have is going to decrease, you better increase the price of every conversion and sell the more expensive stuff to maintain that income. I mean, business wise, it is astounding. Like, I am in like all the admiration for the industry. But I think what you're talking about too with the younger generations, or I guess they're not even that young anymore, but I'm just that old. But
they're old enough that they could be drinking if they wanted to.
Exactly. There's this savviness. There's this savviness because it's similar to those of us who grew up when the studies were able to tell us that like smoking was actually not healthy for you. Like we have that now. We've got more hardcore evidence that alcohol just really has 0 health benefits, and any that we get touted are
You're
just
absorbing
negligible.
the benefits when you study it of socialization, extroversion, community, and then there's like a secondary effect. But every time they try and generalize it just to alcohol, you can't. It's not good for you.
Nope. And that's why I get on my soapboxes because I know that there are people who it's not bad enough that they want to go to therapy, or they want to go to therapy for their trauma, and they're paying, $1 zillion an hour, which is well worth it, right? Like, but they're picking and choosing what needs to come up in that hour.
Yeah.
And it's the trauma, and the drinking is just kind of this other side thing where it's not problematic enough to warrant therapy time, but it just nags at their brain, and they end up on that Groundhog Day where it's like, ugh, okay, I'll try again today. Okay, dry January is coming up.
Yeah. Well, and like there's a lot of people who I think genuinely want to work on that, but they're not at the place where they need 12-step to be alive or employed or married or whatever. And they're afraid that if they go to a therapy office and say that they're going to be told you have to go to AA and come back, you're not ready, commit, whatever. And yeah, I mean, maybe that's right some of the time. Not every therapist who says that to somebody, they didn't need to hear it. But there are people who I think avoid therapy because they don't want to hear that. And if they need something else, I'm glad it's there.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was well said. Yeah. And it's important to me to be part of how there is something else there for them.
Yeah.
Not to take away from any of these other methods, but just to add and say there's a subset of people who even if that were right for them, they're not going to do it. So we
Mhm.
need to get them in another way.
Yeah. You have anything else that you were working on or that you would like to talk about? I mean, Brainspotting and gray area drinking are kind of what you're loud and proud about on the internet. But are there other kind of insights or questions you? I don't know. I'm trying to keep these open-ended.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get
With
loud
the
and proud. You're
uncertainty
right.
principle.
You're right. Oh gosh, don't I will go all day on that. Mostly that, and then like I said, the perfectionism and the business ownership thing, and how a lot of it to me is people end up buying these like Erin Condren planners and, you know, overhauling their schedule to try and be like their most productive version of themselves, especially business owners, because we want to be able to walk away from
We
work
have this
at the end
like
of the day.
CEO cult, you know, like
Yes.
the masterclass thing where they're like, oh, I want to get into playwriting. I need to like buy 12 hours of David Mamet talking or something. And it's just kind of like, I don't know. We just have this weird thing where like, I don't know. Why would you want to be like Steve Jobs? You know, like it just like that's something that so many people, I get that there's aspirational things about these people, but there's a lot of that kind of like the cult of the executive that is not healthy, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of, well, I'm not going to go, I was about to go straight back to alcohol. You're right. It is the thing I'm most loud and proud about, because I think it's the first domino that needs to fall before these other things fall in place. But to go back to this idea of business ownership, right? I have a friend who I know who she calls it, for her clients, they want to be time rich. And so that's why they aim for the CEO mindset, right? Because then it's time wealth. I started my business so I could afford the lifestyle I want, and I don't have to be tethered to my business, right? Versus that hustle startup mindset. And so I don't want to steal her terms, but I was just like, oh yeah, you nailed it. But so a lot of the business owners I work with, it's like they get in their own way with the perfectionism and the overthinking, and then they want to like color code a calendar because it's like, well, then I won't procrastinate. Procrastination is a huge thing I brain spot with a lot of my clients, is the business owner ones, is the procrastination. Because we look at it similarly to not necessarily a trauma, but where it's like, well, there's some sort of like thing in you that's saying like, don't do it. Like anything but that, right? Like
Or
it's a very
anger.
visceral
So
response.
much of that avoidance is like there's an anger that you kind of don't like what you're doing or how you're doing it or your relationship to it.
Yeah. Well, and then what happens is people try to figure it out. Well, am I angry at it? Is it because I'm afraid of success? Am I afraid of failure? But all of those questions are in your top brain, and that is not where you need to make the switches. We need to get in the brain and body to make the switches. So that's just kind of the next level of work I do with people is, okay, we've dealt with the alcohol. Now let's deal with any lingering perfectionism, procrastination stuff.
Yeah, I think like we think emotionally or like our thoughts come from emotion and then we figure out what they are with thinking, but we pretend it's the other way around.
Because it feels good, because that's a sense of control.
It feels like I'm in control more than I am.
Yeah.
But then we do
that's why I love and hate uncertainty.
Well, but we do it the opposite when we're dealing with like society things, because that also makes us feel in control. Like people pretend that like politics is about values or something. And it's like, no, I think it's about material reality. Whereas like with your body, like in your brain, like what you're thinking has so much more to do with what you're feeling. And then you are not just rationalizing that sounds like it's too reductive or writing it off too much, but you're figuring out what that is later. But I mean, just look at the way that the brain is wired and running. You were feeling first before you were in language or in time, you know? So start with that. And we pretend it's backwards, that no, I'm just going to think my emotion away. I'm going to solve an emotional problem intellectually by talking about it. And then eventually I'll feel different.
Yeah.
And, you know,
and there are people who, because they thought about it differently, not because they thought about it differently, they thought about it differently. Somewhere something shifted and they mistakenly assumed that was why it shifted. And so we're giving it the credit when that was a coincidence or a springboard for something else to happen, if that makes sense. And so it gets the credit, sort of like, oh gosh, listen to how I really am like a soapbox person, aren't I? I'm learning so much about myself on your podcast. So much like the idea that dry January gets the credit for a reset for drinking, when really it's not. Like, we're giving the credit to something that didn't do anything. It was a vehicle, but it didn't do the thing. We have to figure out what did the thing and then focus on building that skill, which I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, analytical therapy is where that happens. I mean, Irvin
Yeah.
Yalom used to say, you just let them talk until they feel, and they'll say, it doesn't matter what they're saying, they'll say the same thing, and then all of a sudden they'll feel it or something. And
I
I
love a
remember,
good Yalom quote. I love a good Yalom quote.
well, like there were, like, I remember listening to like 70s Jungian analysts, like tapes, like they were digitized when I had them in college, but they were like literally like ripped off cassette tapes, and you could hear like the rewind scrub and stuff. But they're like, one of the things like they would all agree on, that at the time I was like, what are you talking about? And now it makes sense, was that like the patient only changes in this place in between being awake and being asleep, and you see them in the room for 2 years. Mom made me feel small anyway because of this. Mom made me feel small. And then all of a sudden, like, whoa, mom made me feel small, and they felt it. And brain spotting takes you into this place in between waking and asleep. But a lot of people feel like they're going to sleep, or their clock stops and they lose time. Like, it's that part of the brain that is informing what we do, but the ego is so afraid to let go and admit that it isn't in control, which is the uncertainty principle again.
Yes, it is. And again, that goes back to that third pillar of the trifecta, right? Which is like, there is a difference between knowing something and knowing it. And that's the same thing you're talking about, is like, I can say it and say it and say it, and then one day I freaking say it and I feel it when I say it. And so it's, how do we facilitate that process?
Well, and I think like when people get a self-help book, or they go on a certain kind of like religious or like secular, life change course kick, or, executive coaching, like whatever, that's so much of the thing that actually happens, is it gets you outside of yourself enough to have some perspective. And then it looks like it was the 17 step for success, tier, that you got to spend $5,000 to get the blue scarf or whatever. But really, you just saw yourself differently because you did something different, and like that could be free, or a lot less.
It could. And I think it's out there for free. And I think there's enough about in the work I do out there for free that someone could probably piece it together for themselves and make it happen. And I'm happy about that. And what I virtually basically sell is, well, I can walk you through it a little bit faster than your trial and error method of figuring out how to make it work. And I think that's true of therapy, right? Like, that's not always true of therapy, because we don't heal in a vacuum, and we need that relationship, and that rapport, I think, is really important. But that's true of CBT. Let me put it that way.
Well, the
and not to knock CBT, but I think you can CBT yourself if you have the right information. But it's a lot of guess and check and trial and error. And then of course there's CBT is not the part of the brain we want anyways, but it's an analogy. Anyways, okay, we should start wrapping it up.
Sure, yeah. I want to be respectful of your time. I can and let you go. I don't know. I think that's true though, that the way that the models of therapy that are actually new, because a lot of them you're just kind of putting something in new paper or whatever. But like the ones that are actually new is where somebody, you can see the therapist tried this and this and this and this, and none of it worked, and then they did this thing that worked for them, and then they were like, what was that? How do I say it, and how do I replicate it? And then ta-da, you have Eric Erickson or something, like like those are, they're all attempts to go back to the place where you healed, and then share it with other people when they're genuine, and the cults, or the exploitive modalities, are the ones where somebody is appropriating the language of healing and change to, and somebody who hasn't done it can't tell the difference. So, of course, they're
very well said. I like that. Make that a soundbite.
Yeah, well, I'll send you a little clip. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. If people want to get your services or find out more about your free consultation group, if they're a provider, what do you want them to go? We can link to anything in the show notes. So definitely check those out. But we want to tell us some places where we can find out more about what you do, and definitely tell us about your podcast, because we
Absolutely. Yeah. So the easiest way to find me the fastest is probably Instagram, and I'm just at Carolyn Robistow. I say it's the fastest because it's the easiest. It's just my name. There's no hyphens or anything. Just, it's my name. Go find me. And every other way under the sun to connect with me is on there in some way, shape, or form. So it's kind of like the easiest one-stop shop, including my podcast. My website is Carolyn Robistow, but it's .net, not .com. I slept on that. I actually got rid of .com, and then I couldn't get it back. And I was like, well, there you go. That's what happens. But my podcast is called Brain Unblocked. And if you thought this was a soapbox, boy, I tell you what, there's 70 some odd episodes over there. Plenty more soapboxes about it. So come join me.
Well, great. We'll link to all of that stuff. And if there's anything else, send it to me and I'll link it in the show notes.